back about 2 years ago now. So we have tried to keep engaging with the membership the very best we can from sort of an AphA perspective and a regional perspective. But what we're certainly finding now, and I sort of think back to where we were at that particular event, there was conversations around, do you think we'll ever do any of these online where people could watch it and join us from any part of the country as we sort of do these learning events? And we were all a bit head scratchy about how that might work. How would the networking work? Would it be a useful experience, etc., etc. The world has obviously moved on massively, and we find that kind of our AphA events now tend to be hosted by a certain region, but are in reality for any of our AphA members to come along to. So for today, for example, we've got today's one around NHS and Power BI. We've got tomorrow, whereby we've got a London branch event, which some of you may or may not be going to as well. So it'll be interesting just to see really how these sort of land for people. But so far, for those events that have taken place in the last 12 months, they have been well received and incredibly useful to our membership, which is great. For me, a branch lead, it means that I get to really explore some of the things that are of interest to me and of interest to the membership that I know the best. There will be other ideas that many of you will have, and I think if we bring some of those to the table towards the end of this session, that would be fantastic. And also, I'm always on the lookout for help in this area. So if you sort of feel that you've got a bit of a passion for networking and wanting to bring people together, you're very more than welcome to become a bit of a deputy branch lead or sort of work with me to facilitate some of that. That would be a welcome addition to the Yorkshire and Humber team, I feel. The reason we are here today is to give a bit of space, some thinking time around, specifically around Power BI and connecting into other people. We all know that we're running at 1,000 miles an hour, and specifically over this last year, I don't think data's ever been in as much demand as it is right now, or certainly was. So having this time is just really important to me. I hope it's important to you. And in terms of it being important to me, I want to make sure that the agenda we've got today is really helping you sort of move forward. So feedback again will be sourced at the end of the session. In terms of the agenda for today, hopefully my slides just moved. There's just this little bit of welcome and preamble from me, and I'm going to hand over to Julia. I've just seen very timely, has just sort of entered the room, so it's great to see you, Julia. And Julia's just going to give us an update really on AphA and what we've been doing in these last sort of 12 months and sort of how AphA can help you as members and analysts in your organisations. We're going to move on probably for a 20-minute session into Bruno, who's going to show us some stuff he's been doing around mental health. Then we've got a series of 20-minute sessions. They might take a little bit less time than that. They might take a little bit longer. We're fairly flexible, so we can sort of go from there. I can see screen share's been changed. Does Julia get your slides? They were well rehearsed, dear Al. So if we can just sort of bring our welcome Julia into the group now, which would be lovely.
Hello. Sorry, I think I pressed screen share a bit prematurely.
Keen.
I wasn't trying to butt in.
No problem.
So hello everybody. My name's Julie Wilkins, and I work for the Health Economics Unit by day, but I also work with AphA as part of the regional team. And I just wanted to give you a quick update on what we're doing with a couple of different things. So the AphA mentorship pilot program is something that we're keen to let as many people know as possible. So it's a great opportunity to sort of speak to you today about the program. Can you see my slides okay? I've only got one screen at home at the moment, so hopefully you can see my pilot program slide there.
You can see that.
So what we've done over the last few months is we've put a framework together for a mentorship program. Obviously, it's a pilot program to begin with, because I'm sure we will learn lots of lessons about how to set up and run the program as we go through. but we put a call out for mentors to be part of the mentorship program a few weeks ago, and we had some really good sign up straight away. So the people that signed up to be a mentor, and you can see the link here. There's a dedicated page on AphA's website, excuse me, which has all of the information about the programme on there. So if you want to sort of go and read a bit more about it, please do. But we had some fantastic mentors sign up. We've taken these mentors through 2 orientation type sessions. And they're all experienced analysts in the field, but we just wanted to sort of take them through a programme with a professional coach, and also our president, actually, Paul Stroner. He is a very seasoned mentor, so he's helping out on the programme, and really he's our sort of mentor's mentor, if you like. So we just wanted to set up this programme to something that was specifically for analysts. I sort of got a team of analysts myself, and I always found it quite difficult to try and set them up with people that I didn't know, my own little circle. I wanted to sort of broaden my horizons in terms of what I could offer them for mentorship. So I thought, you know, this is a really good space that AphA could slot into and provide that that network of you know, professional analysts that could act as mentors, but also a platform where mentees could seek out a mentorship program. So really, it's the program, as I say, you can read all about it on the website and download the framework that we put together. But really, it's a chance to a space to think with a peer. The aim is that you would develop professionally and personally. You would expand your knowledge and networks. And for the pilot program, we've suggested a sort of a defined number of sessions, but nothing is sort of set in stone. If the mentor or mentee want to expand that, that's totally up to them. But we just wanted to put some sort of framework around it so that there was a sort of a structure to the relationship. And as I say, we've got some fantastic mentors set up. So over the next few weeks, we're matching mentors to mentees. We're still encouraging people to sign up for to be a mentee. So if you or any of your team you know, would like to take part, then if you just go to the AphA page, and there's an application form that we ask people to fill out, just to give us enough information to be able to match people. So yeah, so hopefully we'll get some good feedback from this pilot program, totally free for AphA members, and you know, we'll take the feedback, and I think the next tranche will probably be towards the end of the year, perhaps the autumn time. But yeah, I think it's really exciting. The feedback we've had so far has been really, really positive. So you know, if you've got any questions, please contact me direct. My email address is there at the bottom, or you can go via Val, who I think is on the call now. But yeah, so please do take part. One of the things that we're hoping to do, and we've got our you know, the various dates set up for the rest of the year, but is to create that network so that the mentors can meet together as a group and discuss their experiences of mentoring, seek advice and offer support to other mentors. So AphA is really great at setting up these sort of specialist interest groups, and you know, sort of making people feel like they've got a support network around them where they can share knowledge and what have you. So we're setting one of those up for mentors, but we're also setting one up for the machine learning side of things as well. So some of the mentors and mentees, the focus might be on sort of data science, machine learning side of things. So what we decided to do is collaborate with the NHSX programme. So this is another thing that I'm sort of working on, and I sort of brought the two together, as it were, is on the Futures collaboration platform, the Analyst X section. There is a machine learning workspace. So if you go into Analyst X and you click onto Analysis and Insights, you'll get a machine learning page option. And if you go into there, you know, I won't sort of talk about it too much, but pretty obvious that there's a sort of a workspace for networking with like-minded data scientists, and there's lots of examples of machine learning going on right now in the NHS. There's a learning pathway, but there's also a link there to the mentorship, AphA's mentorship programme. So we're sort of trying to sort of bring the two together. But what we're doing is setting up a specialist interest group for data scientists who've got interest in machine learning, want to share their work and expand their network and what have you. So please do sort of have a look at that workspace. Again, the link I've put on this next slide. I'll share these slides with Lisa. Yeah, so that will take you into the Analyst X machine learning workspace. There's lots and lots of learning materials in there. And we've actually also launched a machine learning competition, which is being judged by some pretty good people, I would say. So again, if your teams are working on, you know, sort of predictive work, data science, machine learning, then have a think about entering the competition, because it will be a great way to promote collaboration and highlight the work that your teams are doing. You know, it will be great to, you know, take part in these AphA specialist interest groups and really sort of expand the networks and, you know, take part in the mentorship programme to sort of really create those sort of relationships and expand networks that way as well. So yes, that was the update from me. I don't know if anybody's got any questions, because I've only got one screen. So if I stop sharing now, if anybody's got any questions. So yeah, are you still looking for mentors? Yeah, absolutely. If you'd like to be a mentor, then please do you know, go to the AphA website and fill out the form for me, and then I can slot you into the programme. We can have a sort of a chat and work out whether you'd like some sort of specialist support, you know, from the sort of the coaches, and then match you up, which would be fantastic.
Thanks, Julia. So I don't know, are you with us for the rest of the event, Julia, or are you heading off for other bits and pieces this morning?
I've got about half an hour or so I'm happy to you know, sort of take any questions, or if people want to email me, totally happy to sort of.
Probably useful to just pop your email in the chat, and then people have sort of.
Now. Yeah, perfect.
Fab. So if you're ready, Bruno, we're happy to now sort of bring you forward, and you can talk us through some of the work you guys have been doing.
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bruno Alves de Souza. I work for the Digital Intelligence team, the South Centre and West Commission Support Unit. And today I'm just going to give you a quick demo of the mental health tool that we've been working on in our team. So I've got a quick slide deck, which I'll bring forward into ticks. So I'll just give a quick intro about the background of this tool and what was asked of us. Now, in essence, the inception of this tool was in the Southeast Operating Model Network. There was an ask for a consolidation of mental health sources, and in essence, what was requested was we needed a focal point for easy to use mental health information. It needed to be subject-focused approach, and it needed to be, above all, accessible to everyone. It needed to be evolving and capable of adapting to changing priorities in the mental health landscape. Now, this is quite a big ask, as some of you, or most of you, will be aware. There's a lot of mental health data out there. There's a lot of data sources, and it comes from various places. So we needed to find a way to do this. So what did we deliver? We delivered a dashboard, a Power BI dashboard with clear multi-subject approach, and it's the dashboard that auto-refreshes based on the data sales publication times. So this data gets automatically downloaded for all these data sources via ETL process. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. And it gets loaded into one of our data warehouses. And then our Power BI workbook then picks it up. And then what we do with it, we do mapping, we do forecasting, we do SPC, and we do KPIs to display all this information and make it accessible to the end user. We've also built an inbuilt filtering system, and is linked to a lot of reference tables that enables cross-filtering across all these data sources. So obviously all these data sources, they are standalone, but because we need them to talk to each other and we need all the filters to work in tandem, we put in the middle reference tables to play together and make them play nicely together. And last but not least, we created a bit of automation with DAX and Visual Studio to create the creation of complex measures. We're talking about SPC charts and all the standard deviations, upper control limits and lower control limits. This was only possible with a multidisciplinary team approach. So we had collaboration initially from the Southeast Mental Health System and the Central Analytics team doing the ongoing UAT and continuous work with the product owner. We also had the MA collaboration that helped us with our ETL process, the automation and the data import. And then we had the initial prototype created by the digital intelligence team. We also did some joint work with the insights team in order to publish this tool to the website. And last but not least, we did some joint work with the change and release team in order to get all the documentation, all the necessary nodes, and all the product notes out, and the maintenance of UAT logs and change logs. So what was the end result? So in the end, we ended up with an assurance tool that gives us all sorts of information at a glance. So on the screen at the moment, you'll be seeing screenshots of what's happening, but I'm going to be doing a live demo and show you exactly how this tool works. It was quite an interesting piece of work to do. It's still an ongoing project, hoping to get it delivered by the end of July. But in essence, there's a lot of mental health subjects here, and they all work quite nicely in a dashboard form. So what does this look like in real life? So hopefully you can see on the screen, I got Power BI desktop version, and these are the data sources that we're currently using. As you can see, we're pulling from all over the place. We're linking them all together to reference tables, and they're all talking to each other, which is quite nice because when we want to use filters across the board, they need to all be linked. So what does the dashboard actually look like? So this is the intro page. Nothing very exciting here, just a quick intro with all the necessary logos, etc., etc. When you press continue, it brings you to a landing page that contains all the necessary nodes, all the contact details, data sharing governance agreements, and the methodology and data nodes. So our approach within the team is a minimalistic design. So as you can see, all of these, when you publish them onto the web, which I haven't because I wanted to show you the design of it. At the moment, you can see all the tabs at the bottom, but when you publish onto the web, all of these are hidden to the end user. And in essence, what you have to do, you have to use a navigation menu right here at the top. And so when you tap on that, you get given a menu, and this allows you to navigate within this document. So let's go for the core data pack initially. So the core data pack is amalgamation of various measures and various targets, and this gives you an at-a-glance view of how any CCG or STP is doing at any given point in time regarding all the measures that are contained within the data pack. So as you can see, you've got things like CYP access rate, eating disorders, waiting times, access rates for IAPT, recovery rates, etc. And all of this is a timeline view with a target if there is a target, and you can see at a glance if this target is being reached or not. Now, within this workbook, there's quite a lot of functionality, and I'll walk you through it. So there's an exclamation mark here that allows you to have a look at all the metadata. At the moment is a bit incomplete, but there's going to be information about where this data comes from, how often it gets refreshed, and all of those things. There's a filter button that allows you to bring up the filter pane. And again, we're being a bit unconventional about it because usually you'd use a filter pane here on the side, but slices gives us a bit more flexibility to leverage and to filter data. So you got things like organization type, organization name, and you got measures. Now, at the moment, as you can see, because this is a sort of KPI dashboard, this filter here does not affect it. But I'll show you in a second. I'll just swap to detail view where this will actually affect the current view. So if I hide that again, and if I go onto a detailed view of this dashboard, this makes more sense. So you get a detailed breakdown for the specific measure that you have selected. And again, if you bring up the filter pane, this is where the slicer then kicks into play. So if you select any of these, the views will change accordingly to show you what measure you're looking at. The other thing that we thought would be quite handy is sometimes when you select filters, it's not exactly clear what filters you have selected. So we created a little subtext here that tells you what filters you got selected, like organization type, organization name, data quality consistency, which is the measure that's currently selected. And the charts also reflect what's currently being done. So if, for example, you were to select the CYP CYP eating disorders, you'll see that the subtext changes. There's a little description here at the bottom, a little gauge chart to show you what the target is and how the specific CCG is doing. And at the moment, we got all CCG selected. So I don't know, let's quickly select one and see how they're doing for this one. Here we go. So that's now selected. That's how they're doing. That's the target. So if we go on to the next target, the next tab. So the next one is learning disabilities. And again, a similar approach. You have an SBC chart, you have a timeline chart, which will contain forecasting once the data gets more populated, and then the necessary CCG STP maps, and then a filter pane that contains all the filters for this specific data set. So you've got things like region, STP, CCG, GP, and the necessary measures. And again, you can scroll down this list and it'll take you to whatever measure you have selected. So I'm just going to hide that again. And let's go to AphA publications. This is quite a complex tab. So this one not only contains a lot of measures, but it contains two groups of measures. And you can see there's already some measures selected. So if I quickly take that away. So because this workbook contains two sets of measures, so we have percentages and we've got whole numbers. I've split these into two groups of measures. So you got measure group 1 and measure group 2, and this will then bring you to two sets of measures. So it's in essence different aggregation types. So when you go down to the detail level of this, you can see that this one's being aggregated at an average level because we're talking about percentages. And again, same thing as before. If you go into the measures, you'll see that these measures change accordingly. So if we go into measure group 1, and if you go into the detail, when you go into the filter, you'll see that these measures will then contain only that specific aggregation. So again, let's navigate to another workbook, learning disabilities. So similar approaches before. We try to be consistent across all of our tabs. And again, as you can see, there's a little subtext that tells you what's currently being selected and all your necessary visuals in order to explore the data. And again, if you select any of these measures, all those visuals change accordingly. Another thing to notice, because this is Power BI, do bear in mind that each of these visuals can interact with each other. So if you were to select, for example, in this bar chart, if you also select a specific month, then each of these visuals will change. Now, because this is a line chart, that's only going to give you a point in time. But again, this is a table will only give you values for that specific month. And the CCG and STP map will then change to reflect what you have selected. If I go on to SMI, so that's health checks. So a different dashboard approach. We've got at the top all the 6 health checks together with all an aggregation of all of them. And when you bring the filter pane up, you can see you got filtering in place, STP, CCG, and any health checks that you might want to select in order to analyze. Like contextual measures. So that's another tab. Again, a similar approach as before. This data is not as extended as the previous data sets. We're working on encompassing more data for this. But again, same approach as before, SBC chart, a timeline chart, a table bar chart, and a CCG and an STP map. And again, all of these can be interacted and all of them can be used in tandem. And then you've got the necessary filters here that you might want to select from, all your measure groups, all your measure names. And whenever you select them, you can then check and analyze it. Last but not least, we got a performance data set for the MHSDS. It's quite a big data set. Again, a similar approach as before. You got two groups of measures because, again, we needed a split between different aggregation levels. And again, a filtering pane. And as you can see, when you scroll down this list, there is a ton of measures here to analyze because, like I said before, it is quite a big data set. So when you select any of these, this changes then to accommodate whatever selection you have made. So in essence, that is the mental health assurance tool. I'm not going to take a lot more of your time. This is quite a complex tool to work with. There's a lot of work that has gone into this. There's also some facilities here that you might find useful. There is an email button here at the bottom that gives you the capability, once published, to send an email to the necessary people with the right subject and the right body. So it does that for you automatically. So in this case, you would create an email for the product owner and myself containing feedback on the mental health assurance tool. And in terms of what is the future for this tool, I'm just going to quickly swap to my presentation, see if it's still in place. So what do we expect to see in the future? We expect to include more mental health topics. There's a lot of data on the pipeline that I'm still working with. We expect to have theme-oriented workbooks. So in essence, it might be that we come to a point where this becomes such a big tool that we will be splitting this. Mobile reporting is also on the pipeline once we get to N365. And yes, and N365 integration and report dissemination. You'll find this in the cloud, pulling from Azure data sources, hopefully in the future. And last but not least, a bit more narrative. So how to get insights from this on a narrative-driven basis. So it's all very good and well looking at a chart, but again, you need to explore the data. But if all of a sudden you start getting more insights and telling you this ECG has done so well compared to this measure, etc., etc., so all of those will be included in the future. So yeah, we've done the live demo. And last but not least, any questions? Feel free to ask any questions that you might have about this tool. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So I see a question from David Chapman. So how much data transformation was done in Power BI? So in essence, the data is loaded into a warehouse, so it's not really changed at source. In terms of data transformation, there's quite a bit that's got into it. So there's a lot of sort of pivoting or unpivoting when needed, because I like to work with sort of long data rather than wide data. So that gives me the chance to use filters and filter and use DAX expressions to better work with the workbook. There's also been occasions where there was some sort of cleaning up to do depending on the data source. But apart from that, not a lot, because in essence, DMA does a lot of that for us. So we tend to work that way. DMA has the expertise to load the data, do the ETL process. We then take it on to us to just produce dashboard. So yeah, sort of collaborative working. Rob Nottingham, fantastic dashboard. Thank you very much. What is the biggest challenge we faced when producing? In essence, was finding a common denominator in order to display all the data. We tried to have a look at the data and see what was the best approach in order to display it. And to be fair, I don't think we've settled on an approach. This is going to evolve as people use it. So we receive a lot of feedback, be it positive, negative, constructive, whichever way, and then this gets applied, and then we go on to the next development cycle and improve on it. It's finding the right way to display all this and still be easy on the eyes and simple to use. But yeah, that's been the biggest challenge. Is of all these data sources, how do we find a common way to display it and make sure that it looks good? Scott, thank you very much. That's good to hear. And yeah, okay, I think that's all the questions. Does anyone else have any questions for me?
Thanks, Bruno. Clearly generated lots of positive feedback, and I think hopefully it's given people sort of food for thought in terms of sort of what's possible with sort of Power BI and certainly big data sets such as the one that you're working with. One of the questions I just had was around sort of the governance and sign-off sort of process of it. How many sort of iterations of that are you sort of going through, and how regular does that cycle tend to play out?
So in terms, sorry, are we talking in terms of IG?
Not necessarily information governance in terms of permissions, but in terms of people being okay with what you're delivering. So kind of checking back in with the user.
Right, I see. So within digital intelligence, in essence, Okay, so as a specific example for this dashboard, we developed a prototype and then we delivered it to a very small group of people. So in this case, the initial group was the Southeast Mental Health System and all their leads. And in essence, because it's still in the sort of prototype phase, we got a group of about 15 people that use the dashboard and get back to me in terms of feedback. We also have the product owner, which is Samara McKinsey, and we have a team that provides UAT in terms of figures and in terms of how the numbers are looking like. So that's the initial stage. So that's once it leaves prototype, it gets expanded onto a wider audience, and then we decide what the audience is. Usually we expand it to the SCW. And then that's what we'd like to call the beta phase. Once it gets onto beta phase, then we have more people using it. We receive more feedback. And again, iterative process for development. This feedback gets implemented depending on how good we think that feedback is. And then after we've ironed out all the kinks, then yes, it gets onto a final phase, onto a final delivery phase, which is when it goes out to public and it gets delivered up to the wide audience.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bruno. So I'll just give 3, 2, 1 to any other questions if anybody wants to raise their hands.
I think
3, 2,
Debbie
1.
Hunter, how long did it take us to get to this point? I'd say it took us about 2 months from the initial. Okay, so so we started working on this around March time. And it was the initial prototype phase where we were just hunting around and deciding what data sources we were going to use. So that was the sort of research stage where we decided what data sources we're going to go into this. But in terms of designing the workbook, I'd say about 2 months and a half. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Thank you very much. So obviously, Bruno will share his details in terms of any questions and feedback you might have after the event. Unfortunately, you can't stay with us for the rest of the morning. You've got something much more monumental to
Thank you.
Your time. But thank you for coming, Bruno, and sharing that with us.
Thank you very much. As this is being recorded, I'll definitely be checking later on because I'm always interested in these things. So thanks again, and thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, so you can see now why I was slightly hesitant about wanting to follow that particular piece of work because I do think it is just the way it works and how people interact with that, and the visualization of that sort of really hits home a little bit the potential of Power BI models. That said, I'm going to talk us through kind of my experience here at Rotherham for the last sort of 12 months that I've sort of been here and what I've experienced with Power BI. And then I'm going to hand over to James Lay, who is our information manager working in our newly established command centre here at the RFT, and has been working with the operational teams to bring a bit of a proof of concept and some principal models together, and he'll share some of that work with you. So I'm just going to share my screen. I don't know why we feel the need to say that sentence, because it's obviously very obvious that that's what we will be doing. So PowerPoint slideshow. I've got the red border around it, which hopefully means you can see it. Okay, wow. So where to begin? So I'm just sort of going through really on that sort of personal insight really into sort of Power BI. So I started here at Rotherham on the 24th of February 2020, so just before the world sort of changed for all of us working in healthcare data fairly considerably. And I came over from a trust that had been used to using ClickView. So as I sort of put on the introductory slide, other data visualization tools are available. AphA is not affiliated to Power BI specifically, just an opportunity to bring people together who are working in that space. And I sort of came across then, obviously, Power BI, so very, very new to me. Relatively new in the organisation. I think it had been in place maybe a couple of years, and people were starting to get familiar with models that they had, but it wasn't, I would say, sort of all pervasive or kind of where it maybe might want to be in the future. And I think working with the team that I had, the excellent team that I have, a couple of members are on the call today, we were able to sort of look into what was working, what might needed to be different, and what Power BI could actually sort of do for us. But it was a bit of a learning curve for me, I would say, and it's a bit of a learning curve for any new analyst sort of moving into this space. So it can feel a bit lost. I certainly felt lost at the beginning in terms of kind of which way do we actually take it. There's so many different ways of showing data. I considered myself to have quite a good background in data visualization and how to the sort of psychology of perception and how people should look at things. But it just felt a different way of having to engage with users and sort of designers on a product I knew very little about. There is a almost infinite amount of knowledge on YouTube, and many people are experts in navigating through that sort of rabbit hole. I'm not one of them. I sort of get into one YouTube, I find it a bit overwhelming, I go to the next one, I feel it more overwhelming. I do need to work with people. I need to collaborate, I need to share ideas, and that's probably part of what's driving today's session as well. I'm assuming that sort of some of us are also in that space. Those of us that can do both will no doubt do better in terms of learning about Power BI. But once I sort of got over that initial sort of where do we even begin, it was incredibly easy to get started. So once we sort of knew where to get data from, the amount of different data sources we can bring into Power BI, things like the PDFs where they're relatively unstructured, but bringing them into Power BI, suddenly you could structure data almost at the click of a couple of buttons. It then became for kind of people like myself, no doubt people like yourself, a bit of a toy box of things to look into and begin to play with and see what we could actually do where. So we started beyond our models that we already had in place, obviously with COVID. That became an obvious choice for creating a daily dashboard, which was integrated with spreadsheets on Microsoft Teams. So we had different teams in the organisation bringing data into spreadsheets, which might seem outdated in terms of the technologies that we've got available to us, but we were running so quickly that our EPRs actually hadn't been customised or updated to collect the information that we knew we needed to collect, and therefore sort of processes were put in place. In many ways, those processes are still in place, even though we know we could do it better. But it's become ingrained in terms of how we do this at the moment, specifically around COVID, not necessarily for other areas. But we could bring in HR data in that way. The HR team could access the same data sources. We could feed that into Power BI. And one of the things that we began to find, which I found really exciting, and other people may have already known this for years, is that we could bring in APIs from government websites. Not going to pretend I even know what an API is, but we could bring in data that was published regularly on a government website and feed that into our Power BI, so we could get our community rates coming through, which this is a lifetime chart on here. So that's yesterday's community figures for our 3 surrounding localities. And we can see that Sheffield is sort of getting that sort of rise in their community cases. And we're not necessarily seeing that in Barnsley or Rotherham at the moment. So once I sort of began to understand that its capabilities as a team, we were certainly able to just keep progressing and moving sort of forward and forward. But one of our biggest challenges really is to look at how things interact. So just going to pull back because I forgot this slide was coming on, clearly well rehearsed. So one of the other elements of the COVID dashboard and the interoperability with some of the team's work allowed us to be able to do sort of refreshes and use Microsoft Flow to send out automatic emails along the way. Developing and learning more about that functionality is sort of almost selling us even further down the Power BI sort of route in terms of its efficiencies for analyst teams, just in the automation of how we share data across the organisation quickly. So yeah, so moving back on to just the template design, because it is so easy to customise and change things around, it's becoming increasingly important that we have some standards within our organisation, and we're just in the process of really building them in now, because we've moved into different ways of displaying our data. So this model looks very different than the COVID one in terms of how it's structured, and we want to create a bit of an internal brand. But what is different here as well is we're starting to think about the traffic light system in terms of, is this model signed off? And my question to Bruno earlier about governance was really a reference to that. It's how do we make sure that beyond the data quality, the overall customer and users also know that the data is safe to use and make decisions off the back of. So So just finally from me, before I sort of hand into James, so in terms of our challenges of getting this out into the organisation and creating that branding and people knowing where to go with things, one of the first sort of feedbacks we had was how do we access it? So we created a little button on the on our hub so people can access the My Insights and Power BI. It's the pink one in the bottom left-hand corner on here, right-hand corner. And therefore they now can at least go into a central place to find their insights, which is familiar to them. So we know that Microsoft Teams also has this functionality now where you can just go in and find your Power BI models, but a lot of our organisation isn't there yet with the Teams landscape. So just saying the word, you can find it in Teams, can put them off. And say you can find it on the hub, suddenly they breathe a bit of a sigh of relief until we move the organisation forward to feeling more comfortable with all of the team space. We also have a bit of a blog, so we're trying to get into a habit of an analyst team of publishing, when we've published a model, that we push that out into the organisation to see something is now available. And we can see we've got sort of a rapid succession really of some developments going through our organisation now, which we'll just build on as we go onwards and onwards. So bringing us into sort of where I am now, I suppose a year on, where the team is a year on, in terms of we know we need to monitor more about how many dashboards we've got in place, who's looking at them, where's the engagement, which customers are using these, or colleagues are using these the most, and what do they do with that information when they've got it. There is an inbuilt admin portal into Power BI, which helps get this information at the drop of a hat, but it doesn't necessarily bring an analyst the numbers that they want to see. So when I look at this, it doesn't mean very much to me. I want to see we've got more than we used to have, who's engaging where and how often. So you can use the Audit Centre to download that information. At the moment, it can only do sort of either a month at a time or 90 days in total, which is slightly problematic. And when it does download, it downloads in a file type that requires a bit of data wrangling. So we're just exploring the PowerShell option of being able to get all of that data through. Again, it will mean something to some people and not to others. So I'm going to pause for breath there and also stop my half of the presentation. If we do have questions, then we can sort of bring them into the end when James has done his bit. So I'm just going to hand over to you now, James. All right.
Thank you, Lisa.
Welcome.
And if only if only Bruno had gone after me. But thanks for that, Lisa.
All right. You have to go and see his baby scan.
Moving quickly on, I'm working as the information manager within the Command Centre, and I just want to talk you through just a few tips and tricks and some developments that I've been making on some potential changes that we're looking to implement with regard to the branding and the actual accessibility of reports. So this is real time. Hopefully chat won't keep popping up there. If you can just pause that for a minute while I run through this. So I created a report, and I'm very much interested in engaging and making more app-like experiences for engagement. So what we've got here is quite a high level UECC is our A&E department, which does encompass some primary care as well. So created this, and it's just showing you some of the functionality which I think engages the end user a little bit more. It has been developed in conjunction with operational leads, just with regard to detail they may want to see. So information panel at the front, very similar to other things that Lisa's been running through. And then if you hover over, the beauty of buttons is you can just literally tell from the pop out what you're going to get when you click on the button. So this is the high level by day number of UEC A&E to all the other members of the team is it's the A&E attendances over the last 8 weeks. Now, one of the functionalities which gives you a much greater screen space, which was also demonstrated by Bruno, is having the pop-out panels. The other thing, just to actually reinforce the fact that this is a selection panel, you'll notice that the right-hand side of the screen has been greyed out, so they can't select anything over here. But you can very quickly, over the last 8 weeks, if you wanted to compare the attendances on a Monday for the last 28 days, that should be actually. So you can clearly see that Mondays has been quite a busy day. And you can do other aspects where the greyed out bars are weekends and bank holidays, which obviously have a slightly different profile. The other interesting thing to actually provide our end users with is having the pop-out tooltips, and I don't know whether anybody's used these, so you can actually just hover over a particular day and you can see the actual profile of the attendances for that particular day, and that will change depending on the day that you actually choose. But it gives them a very quick graphical representation of what happened on that specific day. To make it very much more a button click or an app-based experience, they can select. There's not a lot of menus down the side for them to select, so this is the weekly view, so it's taken the last 28 weeks, and again we have a slightly different tooltip to show you the attendances by the day. And likewise, you've also got the last 18 months so that we can see. Not quite sure what happened here in April of last year, but the UECC attendance has dropped considerably. I think it might have had something to do with some infection somewhere or other. Just moving back to the daily, the other aspect which is quite useful to allow customers or end users to have is if you have the option to drill through for specific detail. So this for that particular day, which is configured to appear, we can see again the profile of the attendances, the work streams, and because Power BI is all connected data, if you click on an age band of 0 to 19, you can quite clearly see the profile of those attendees that we have. So I'm just going to get, just in case there's anybody chatting to me on the other screen. And then if you actually hold control, you can quite clearly take the full age group and you can select independently. You can see when our ambulance attendance has arrived, and it's all interactive. The button, return to the home screen that you were on. I'll just move to monthly because we've then got, again, there's your tooltip if you're wanting quick detail, but you can also drill through. Now, we've also done some mapping, which is useful for operational colleagues, which they said they wanted in the actual dashboard, where the attendances are coming for our surrounding CCG practices. So we can see, and the interactivity and introducing, for want of a better word, a bit more of a fun experience for people to look at so that they can actually see this is what came in from Rotherham. These are the practices with the number of attendances we had for June this year so far. So there's lots of interactivity which does appears to have gone down very well with the end users to actually engage them a little bit more. Now, I haven't put any patient specific information in here, but we can also take the primary diagnosis that came out of ED for the admitted and the non-admitted patients. Again, the interactivity is all there. So if we want to know who's coming in on an admitted status between normal office hours, and this can just help guide some strategic decisions, but it's just a much more accessible way for people to access the data. It may look very simplistic in respect of Bruno's complex data sets, but you can have drill through to more and more detail. One of the things that is interesting is if you drill through to the practice locations, and then if you select a particular practice, you can then drill through to the primary diagnosis of just those patients there. So there's a lot of available options when your drill through options are configured to actually enable people to really dig deep into the data to the level that they want to dig into. So it's a very quick just show through as to some of the capabilities with regard to the pop-out menus to save some real estate. The tooltips appear to have gone down very well with a lot of the users of this dashboard, because it's a very quick reference so that we can see from week to week just where the pressure points are. So I wanted to go live and just show it you in real time, because I thought that was the best way to do it. But I'm open to taking any questions, although I don't profess to know the answer to every single bit of information.
Thanks, James. That was great. So we've had some feedback already in the chat. So just a few people sort of saying it's really neat, that they love it. Good to see the progress. So Rob, don't know whether to put you on the spot, whether you actually want to come and ask your question, or if you'd rather I'd ask it out. I'll give you a 3, 2, 1 to take you off mute if you want to.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know, just sort of following convention of people putting questions in the chat, but no, happy to jump in. Yeah, just sort of going back to what you were saying, Lisa, on just one thing that I've been talking to some colleagues about recently. We're just at the very beginning of our Power BI journey, but we're talking about sort of in the early stages about sort of branding. And it's interesting because some of my colleagues have been of the opinion that they don't want to necessarily call it by any name at all. They'd rather just sort of say it's a reporting dashboard, this is the inpatient dashboard or whatever. I think because in the past they've been burned by implementing other BI tools which haven't had the right implementation, and therefore that tool then sort of has the gets the reputation for being bad. It's just all people just hate it for whatever reason because it's not been implemented properly. So I was just interested in your perspective on the branding, because you were talking about how you do that. And do you just call it Power BI? Do you sort of give it? Do you try to rebrand it as something else?
Yes, I'm quite wedded to rebranding it as our Insights portal. It's not particularly novel because a lot of people now have Insight portals, including NHS E&I. But I do think it's important to create a suite or a brand that people recognise and talk about in such a way. I've seen it sort of done before where we have sort of a knowledge portal rather than ClickView. I think the problem becomes if we just call it Click or we just call it Power BI, it feels like a tool rather than a product and a service. And it's kind of going very much about creating an insight service into our organisation. So yeah, but it takes some doing even for our own staff to kind of get into that mindset of just calling it an insights model, and how you then label the titles insights and just keep saying it. Takes a while for that to sort of get into people's mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, one of the challenges we might face is that our current EPR is one that we've built in-house, and it's called Insight. So we might need to work on a different name. But
and of course, you'll need a different name because you don't want our Insight.
Can't use yours.
So I can just see your hands gone up, I think. Sharmini?
Hi, that was a really great dashboard to look at. So in our trust, we're on ClickView and we're looking to transition to something else, something new that can help us progress forward. But my question is more around the data side of it. How much time and attention went into preparing the data in a way that allows you to then build the reports on?
So I'm gonna bring a different colleague into this conversation, if that's all right, David. So David, I'll let you introduce yourself and why I brought you into that conversation.
Hello, so I am David Simmer, a business intelligence and data warehouse manager here at Rotherham. So I think, James, am I right in thinking that you did that against the Cube?
That's right, yeah, easy.
Right, okay. So we have a data warehouse here, which has taken, I'm not going to lie, a few years to to build up. It's pretty good. Kimball methodology, fact and dimensions, and then on the back of that we have various cubes, some multidimensional and some tabular. That, if you don't know what they are, the multidimensional is the older Microsoft technology, tabular is the newer technology, which is much easier to use in Power BI, and Power BI is pretty much designed around the tabular cubes. And so James can just go down and pull in various bits of data into his Power BI, and a lot of the measures are already done for him. And then, am I right in thinking that I'm sure that, James, you've probably done some of your own DAX on top of that within that model?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, there has been some DAX implementation on that model.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm just going to draw just that to close, just in interest of time. We can have the Q&A as well at the end of the session. That's kind of built some time in for that, hopefully. And so I think just in succinctly, in terms of the data for that particular model, relatively, because the hard work had already been done through the use of our cubes. There are other models in our organisation which take a lot longer to bring together because they're not data that's necessarily stored within sort of either our facts and DIMS, or if they are, they're not information that we're used to reporting on. We've got such an availability of data now, the possibilities are endless, and so is the demand. But yeah, okay. Good. So just some other comments in the chat that you might want to read at your leisure, James, and then I'll just bring in sort of Cloud2 to talk about some work that they've done around sort of command centres and their customer group. Hopefully it might not be around command centre, could be a surprise to all of us, and then we'll have a short break so you can grab a drink and sort of stretch out a little bit before the final two sessions.
So just an absolute, really impressed to see what you guys have moved on to, and like I say, a real pleasure to see you guys again on screen. So thank you ever so much for giving the opportunity for us to show what we've been doing in regards to command centres. So I'm going to get straight in and bring my slides onto the screen. Yeah, Cloud2, we originally started working on command centers, very much inspired, and I think many were inspired by the work GE had done over in the States and imported into Bradford. And Cloud2 being a Bradford-based company, we hopped along to the open day and had a look at what the command center looked like and was like, wow, this is really impressive. And then after about an hour in front of the screens, we were actually stood next to some doctors. And they asked the question of, well, what do I look at? There's so much. What do I do with it? And we realized, do you know what? This is a massive leap forward, but it's not yet the end point. And this coincided with us doing some work with a partner called the Public Service Consultancy, the PSC. They were called 2020 Delivery at the time. And from working with 15 hospitals to improve flow, one of the things that had seen across all of them, and this is just one example of a trust, is that during an improvement phase, we'd have this sprint period and performance would improve during that sprint, and performance would then get held for a sustained phase. But after about 6-7 months, performance would go back exactly to where it was. And so we were kind of going, well, look, there's got to be a way to actually, when you make these improvements, make them more sustainable. So during 2019, Cloud2, the Public Service Consultancy, the Alan Turing Institute, and the University of Edinburgh, we all came together to create a vision for a way to create sustainable bed flow management. Now, we looked at how you create sustainable models, and we came across from the Institute of Safe Medicine Practices this model that they introduced and said that you've got to have things in place at each of these 6 levels. So training and education, rules, reminders, checklists, simplification, automation, and forcing functions. And we really realized that most of the current offerings were around this bottom section. And there was very, very little done in the simplification, automation, and in particular forcing functions. And this was where we felt, do you know what, there's some room, there's some opportunity here to really be quite transformational, particularly using RPA with flows, as you've demonstrated in there, gives a glimmer into it. Machine learning, again, gives us some opportunities in there. So we created Flow. So meet Flow, the virtual flow assistant. So Flow supports hospital bed management by automating daily bed management tasks. This is what Flow looks like. It's 4, now designed to be 5 screens covering the emergency department, admissions, transfers within and out of the hospital, a ward's detailed view, and a 5th screen which is about discharge management. And so you can speak to Flow. Hey Flow, who is expected to be discharged today? Or how many admissions are expected in the next 2 hours? Which wards have best capacity? What is the forecast bed state for tonight? Common questions that we would ask in the control rooms. The key features of Flow is a very, very simple and intuitive user interface. As you can see, if I go back to these screens, for those of you who have seen the GE command centers, they have I think they have 24 separate screens, lots and lots and lots of information on it, and they have a 50-person control room that they run this through. So we've very much gone the opposite end of the spectrum and made it a very, very simple, easy to use interface. It's a real-time display of all hospital key information using HL7 and FHIR APIs if FHIR is available in the organization. We use machine learning to automatically set EDDs for every single patient admitted, allowing proactive discharge. I'll come to that in a minute. Automatic bed allocation to optimally match patients' need to the bed. A real-time 72-hour rolling capacity and demand forecast. Guided next action based on queuing theory, and highlight the root cause flow blockages that are going to require intervention, all done in real time. And so this is those elements built up against that model. I won't go into the full text of that right now, but you can see that what we've done is we've aligned each of those features to the sustainability model. It's designed to work on tablets, designed to work on iPads, designed to work on phones as well. And very much, you know, this is a concept, and we've been putting that theory into practice. So we've done tests of creating the indicators using HL7 APIs. Done. We can do that. That's pretty straightforward. There's actually third-party products that also do it. Many of you may well use things like Rhapsody and things like that help do that. So that one, nice tick. Use machine learning to predict the discharge date. Well, yeah, we built a prototype model of this. We built it in Azure Machine Learning Studio. And for this, we used 3 years worth of admission data, which contained just over 250,000 clinical records in there. And we ran it through a series of tests. So for those of you familiar, we've got a standard linear regression, a boosted decision tree, a Bayesian linear regression, a decision forest, and a neural network regression. Now, here's the sciencey bits. So just bear with me on the stats. So the model had a 0.927 coefficient of determination. So what that means is that there is a correlation of just less than 93% between the predicted discharge and the actual. So 93% of the actual discharge date can be explained by what the model looked at. And the relative squared error, and so this is on average, how much error is there? Using the boosted decision tree, there is a 0.07 day error. So an error of a couple of hours in terms of the average error for predicting the date of discharge. So we're like, yeah, tick. we're able to predict using machine learning. Then using a reinforcement learning algorithm to select the optimal bed move. And I'm quite into chess. In fact, actually, can I quickly spot it on my wall? Yes, I can. Bear with me a second. Sorry about that. If you can just see my little window here, there's a book that I was reading called Game Changers, and it's how machine learning came to dominate chess. And it comes from this article here. And they built an algorithm based on a neural network that analyzes every single possible move, puts it through a Monte Carlo tree search, and then retrains it using a reinforcement learning algorithm in order to identify what is the optimal sequence of chess moves to make. And I kind of went, I reckon I can apply this to bed management. It's that neural network search. What is every single possible patient move that could be made? From that into a Monte Carlo tree search to see which of those moves is the strongest to achieve the desired outcome. And then a reinforcement learning algorithm to see was that outcome achieved. So a fascinating paper to read. If you like chess and you like machine learning, you're going to love this paper. And this looks something like this. So when a patient is clicked on, it then brings up the beds that are available for it with an estimated suitability score. And from that, you can then automate this to say, always select the most suitable bed, and that bed admission decision is automated straight through. So we went, yes, we've put that theory, we've tested it. That's great. That leaves us with the last one, and this is creating and using fairness, accountability, transparency, and ethics algorithms to ensure that the decisions made meet the principles of which we stand by. And this is really where we work very closely with the University of Edinburgh and continue to do so and work with the Alan Turing Institute. This is the area of really groundbreaking artificial intelligence is going, okay, so you can do it, but is it a good thing to do? And this is the area where we continue to progress work on and are really excited about the future of that. So that's our vision of what a command center, what a virtual flow manager, what flow can be in the future. We can see there are the building blocks to enable this to happen. We're working with several trusts at the moment in building out command centers, and at the moment we're bringing elements of this full vision to it. So we're bringing in those live data feeds, very much like you have done. We are starting to use some of the machine learning to do some of those predictive capabilities. But I thought for the purpose of today, sharing the vision of what could be in the future, and something to be really transformational.
Thanks, Tom. Into questions, yep, David?
Well,
hey,
David.
I know, good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I just wondered about the, you might have touched on it, but the variables that you put in through the machine learning for that incredibly high percentage.
Yeah, all right. I can't tell you the full secret sauce, David, but a little tip, admission blood test results. A&E clinical observations and blood test results. Can't tell you the full secret sauce, but that's a good place to have a look at.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Any other sort of questions or comments on there? I'll just do a 3, 2, 1. So just from, yep, Taran, go on.
This is a bit of a planted question, but Tom, that's quite a grand vision, and obviously the NHS has had many other distractions over the past year, so presumably there'll be NHS trusts maybe taking smaller steps along the way to that vision.
Yeah, absolutely. So Royal Bath, we're starting work with them on their first step of their command centre vision in the next month. And Hull University Teaching Hospitals, we were just before the pandemic started, we were about to start rolling out the machine learning elements with them over there. We're just re-engaging with them at the moment to start moving those forward. So yeah, starting to take forward some of these phase one visions of what it could be.
Thanks for that, Tom. And I think just a reflection from me really in terms of all of these tools, sort of however they're written or however they're displayed, tend to start to be getting our customers interacting with the data story on the screen at the time, and sort of some hybrid approaches sort of within a command centre at Rotherham here, where some of the screens are Power BIs, whereby some of them are actual sort of web-based interfaces. And it's just interesting how some of the customers sometimes, or the colleagues, don't really know the difference. They don't need to know the difference. The fact is we can provide that knowledge in a number of different ways in a fairly seamless delivery model. And I think that's what's really exciting about kind of what we can do with some of the Power BI stuff in terms of sort of creating those visualizations in a very straightforward way without necessarily always having to have that real sort of design interface expertise that can limit sort of analysts and how they engage some of that real-time analytics out there. So fab, really good and exciting stuff going on out there. But I'm going to move us away from Bayesian statistics. I think that's probably a different specialist reference group of AphA. Whilst many of us might have a Venn diagram of overlap, many of us might not in the audience today. So time for a bit of a break. I can refresh, just sort of get your head back in the game for another couple of demonstrations after 11 o'clock, and then we will have a bit of a Q&A. So, I think we're probably ready to get started. If you're all right, Kate, you want to introduce what's your name and where do you come from?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. My name is Kay Khan. I am currently working at Keystream Analytics. Personally, I've worked within NHS organisations for probably the last 15 to 17 years, varying from CCGs to public health to providers. So I had a real all-round view of the different perspectives and the data and how it's shared. Focus has been in the recent few years on Power BI, especially Microsoft has made this functionality. I think people were focusing on Click and Tableau for front-end visualization, but in recent years Microsoft has really stepped up in the Power BI area. So our focus has really been on that space. And today I'm going to focus on HR dashboard. My presentation is not as slick as the ones that were there before, but I think as a subject area it's really interesting because it's one of the subject areas or data sets that are often untapped in BI spaces. So hence Lisa and I agreed that that would be a good area to speak about on this presentation. So without further ado, I'll share my screen if that's okay. So HR dashboard. Like I said, it's not often an untapped data set within organisations. It usually sits in HR departments where they have their own analysts and a lot of stuff is done in Excel, and also very reluctant to let go of that data as well. So that's a major challenge in that. Now, once you get past the IG and the challenges around obtaining that data, because it's about sharing it back with the board in terms of what workforce and HR related activity looks like. So my next slide. So I thought it was really important to talk about actually these topics in terms of before we even build a dashboard. I think it's important to focus in on these steps. So we have importance, and I know that these words look very simple: gather, analyze, present, engage, but actually there's a lot more to it. And sometimes people expect something of a dashboard, but you realize that that part hasn't come through in the data set. So I'll give you an example of HR departments might want to look at recruitment and all that type of stuff, but that might sit on a different data set to say ESR. I'm just mentioning these data sets aware that you might not all be on ESR, but essentially it has the same information. So it's important to understand what you're going to present and how to gather that information, and make sure you've got the right data set as well, because sometimes you go further down the line and realize that important piece of information hasn't been included in that extract or that data set. And then have the time to analyze it, what links to what and how it all joins together. I think it's a really important step. You know, for example, employees have different roles throughout their time with their organization, and that sometimes that is duplicated. You have 3 or 4 roles, and if you're not careful how you want to be able to pick the right thing so you get the unique record. So it's important to know how it all links in. Presenting that data, how to visualize that information, what kind of graphs, what kind of visualizations would suit. Personally, I'm a big fan of tree maps. I really like them, but I know I've presented them and the receivers have not always liked them in the way. So I think it's important to understand that as techies, sometimes we think things look good, and there's been times where, you know, the dials and all that kind of stuff looks good, but then your user says, well, what is this all saying? So it's important to keep it simple. And I think, you know, sometimes bar graphs and pie charts do the trick because they're easy to read and people are used to it. So I think we've learned that sometimes over engineering the visualizations because we like it doesn't necessarily mean the right thing for the user. And the 4th step is engagement. I think that's really, really important to speak to the person who would be using, so you can glean some of the ideas that they want presented on a dashboard. And it's nice to go with a prototype because then they're able to feed back. Otherwise, if there's nothing, if there's a blank page, they almost talk about ideas. But I think some kind of prototype, engaging with a super user, and then start to and that really helps in building any dashboard, let alone HR, which is often an area that, you know, is not a data set that many of us are not always engaged with. What do we get told? These are the things that come back usually, especially if it's a data set that we're not really familiar with. Where did you get it? This data's rubbish. How do you know it's accurate? These are the type of things that you will face continuously, even when things have been validated. And I think it's important to really be aware of the kind of terminology. And I think that's why for analysts it's really important to understand the maths behind what they do. So I can give you an example. Some analysts have focused on clinical data. They know the terminology, ICD, diagnosis, HHG, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to things like HR dashboards, FTE, turnover, employee turnover, sickness rates, how is that all calculated? So I think there's a learning curve in terms of the subject area. What is the information we're trying to surface up and why? So as a subject area, you know, it's important to understand those terms because it is HR talk. And if they're displaying that on the dashboards, then the people who are analysing and presenting those dashboards need to also be aware of those terms and terminology, as you would with finance. Finance I struggle with personally because you know, it's just so much there that it's the topic that I kind of switch off. So it's very hard for me to engage personally. But HR, it's quite an interesting terminology. So it's easy to engage with the data as well if you're interested. So I'll go straight into some dashboards, and apologies they're static because I was going to, you know, I know some of you did some live presentations, so I'll stick to the static, but I'll introduce the interactivity. So here, one of the things that HR require are demographics on their employees. This is all dummy data, so don't worry, I'm not presenting any kind of client data here. So you can see here, it's just simple age, gender, ethnicity, employees by contract type, the job roles they have. On this page, there was no need for filters because it was just an overview, because one of the things you have to recognize is the audience, and sometimes if the audience is at exec and board level, you don't want too many filters on the page and drop downs because they get lost and they start saying, well, why does this change? So you want to keep it as static as possible. However, all these visuals do allow you to filter. So if you wanted to focus on 50 to 54-year-olds, if you click that, as you know with Power BI, everything else on the page would filter through as well. And what we particularly liked about this, and what the users liked, is the fact that there's usually 3 dots on each visual. You can export the data, you can look at the raw numbers, because sometimes visuals don't give you those raw numbers displayed. They don't display them in the way that you would. So that extract facility has really helped. And by the way, these are all reports in Power BI Reports Server that we use. That's really quite very popular with a lot of our clients because it's on premises and they know where the data is and there's more control. So that's been really, really popular with healthcare clients. So very basic. One of the things we did find is for one of the clients, when we looked at the age band, now they were presented this information every month on a static report PDF, but when they saw this up on the screen in Power BI, their peak in their age was around here. So their workforce was around late 40s, 50s, going into there. This is where it peaked and it was quite low here. And it made them ask the question, have we got a workforce that we need to replenish? What are we doing about it? And they've never asked that question because it was presented to them in a way that they'd never really thought about that aspect of things. It started the engagement. How do we get a younger workforce in to be sustainable in the future? Because if you're peaking here and it's low here, in this case, you can see it's quite a female-dominated organisation. You can start to see the gender balance, but this has produced insights and made senior people in organizations sit back, not technical, but business leaders, to say, right, we need to do something about our workforce to be future-proof. So that's a demographics one. The other part of it is employees and FTE, and I mentioned FTE is something that many of us take for granted that actually analysts would know, but actually it's not something that would touch on. Very intelligent, very bright, intelligent. It's not a subject area they've touched on, so they've had to go and find out why FTE is measured as in terms of employees and why that is important. And in this case, for example, people wanted to know employees by month. Now, I know that on ESR, for example, and I'm going to go into the data prep because the data warehouse is so key to getting a good data warehouse. Otherwise, it just becomes a isolated dashboard. So in many organizations, people use Power BI, they bring in data, and then if they leave, someone else picks it up and the data is being imported. It's almost they have to reverse engineer that. So best practice is to have a central data warehouse where all the dashboards link into, whether it's a cube or whether it's tables or views or whatever it may be. I think it's important to link into a central repository, whatever shape that comes in, depending on the journey that the organization is in. So analysts can pick up where others have left off as well. So this one was quite key. So for example, in ESR, we know that the number of employees active are there, and that's what you pick every month. And one of the challenges we had is that organizations want to know how many employees there were per month. Now, unless we kept a snapshot of the data every month, which means that the data grows each month, it's a little bit of a challenge. So what we did was we found a workaround to be able to calculate that using the dates left. So there was some clever querying that allowed you to create snapshots for previous months using dates. And it's something that made life a lot easier, and it helped not have those huge data collections month on month. And this is a scenario that some of our colleagues faced with inpatient beds as well. They keep snapshots, but actually there are ways to work around that. So you're less data heavy collecting. You can do calculations to do that. So this gave this dashboard gave a view of the number of employees per month and FT as well, and how many leavers they had, and by contract as well, and various other ways by classification, contract. Now these terms mean something in the HR world, so we try and keep it as similar to what is coming off the system. In some cases you have to change that to a more user-friendly name, but in this case we've kind of kept a similar thing, so we're validating where these fields are coming from in the raw data as well. So this is over the past 12 months, not just the latest position. And then some people want to focus on starters, so you will see on this dashboard many starters in April. Why is that? Confirmed, right? It's because they took on a new contract in April and had to add a whole load of employees. So it's nice to be able to see that, because otherwise, many people will say, that's rubbish. How can that happen? Well, it's not rubbish. This, a whole set of employees that joined, and that's why that grew in that month. And you can start to see it by region, start to click on different regions where that is, and that becomes more interactive. And then leavers, it was important. I know that people do staff turnover, but sometimes it's good to see the raw numbers. And I think this dashboard had different tabs and allowed people to move from that as well. Ultimately, they want the turnover, but some of the raw data that goes behind it, presented like this, was really helpful. So you can start to see leavers in October for that year, and that was because the contract left, so there was an exit, so they could explain that. And then also leaver, one of the things that is quite important, voluntary and non-voluntary. So non-voluntary are where people have left from their own choice. Voluntary is that the contract has come to an end, or it was a fixed term, etc. So people like to differentiate between the two because it does affect the staff turnover rates. So very similar themes. So you can start to see the leavers by contract type. So similar things. So people are following. So it's important that the dashboards tell a story. So if you introduce something new, they need some concept from the previous slide to be able to follow that journey. Otherwise, it becomes a bit scatty. So you're going changing subject, but looking at it in similar themes and dimensions, as we would say in the data warehouse world. And one of the really important things was starters, leavers, trends. So, okay, we might be focusing on this year, but let's do some trend analysis compared to previous year, because that has become even more important in all areas, not just in workforce or HR. With the COVID and recovery, monitoring of COVID recovery, it's important to look at what were we doing this time last year and the previous years, and that helps trying to understand how we need to get back to where we were pre-COVID, or we're still in it, I guess. But this has helped with some of the recovery, especially in some of the inpatient data and appointments data. So here you can start to see that 2021, you've got the starters compared to previous years. That was a huge spike. Here there's something that shows in October 2019 there was a surge. They confirmed also there was some intake of employees at this point in time. So it starts to show if you've varied a lot in certain times of in the last few years. So that's a really good way to. And then here we've included a contract filter so that people can go into the regions. As you had seen in the previous slide, we had different areas, but here they can start to filter that if they want to look at it by each area. Because what this dashboard then does is allows people to look at things by organisation level, but then if you've got contract managers or people in different regions, they might want to look at it by their region instead. And then sickness is really important to measure in an HR dashboard. Here what we've done is presented sickness days. Now the only thing that would come through would be sickness rate in the existing one, but we actually shared a lot more of the data in terms of days and duration, and then the sickness rate. So these are the sickness days, and you can start to see that sickness, what the reasons are, which areas that are affected mostly, which months there were large amount of sickness days as well. And you have to be careful when you calculate this. This is an anomaly that hit us very early on. So sickness starts on a particular day. So if you start sickness day on middle of September and it continues through to November, which is long-term sickness, for October, you need to only measure the days in October. So you need to be careful how you cut off those sickness days, especially if they're especially when you're presenting it by month here. So you need to have a start and end. So if someone's off sick for 60 days, you need to be able to measure it in the month rather than the start and end date as well. And that's some of the issues that can come up. Sickness days, so you'll start to see here sickness days of stress and anxiety. One of the questions came up that, okay, we would have thought COVID diagnosed would have been one of the larger sickness areas, but it wasn't. After some digging, actually, COVID diagnosed came into sickness. However, other reasons for COVID, like self-isolation, shielding, came under absence. So it wasn't classified as sickness in this particular case. So we had to do an absence dashboard separately, particularly relating to COVID. And I'll go on to that in a minute. But that's what this revealed. That, hold on a minute, we thought COVID would be much more, but it didn't come under the category of sickness. Next one, sickness trends for financial years 18, 19, 21. So you can start to see here 2021 was much higher, as we expect, because the sickness did go up in many organisations, and you can start to see the peaks here as well when they did happen. And again, we would have expected more of a peak here, but I'll go on to explain why we didn't get that, because COVID sickness wasn't as much as self-isolation, shielding, all the other absence reasons. So there was a peak in October, and in January in 2021, compared to previous years, sickness generally went up for everything. and then the sickness rate trends. The sickness rates is a really important key element that most HR reports will have. The others are general and analytics, days, number of absences, etc. But actually, the sickness rates are really the important part of this dashboard, because it allows you to be able to look at things in terms of available days that people are working, and it takes into account those type of things. So sickness rate is really important to monitor, and that has some calculations. So the point I made around calculations and understanding the terminology and how it's calculated, and we had to go and look at how sickness rates are calculated, and you'll see that there's a whole methodology of how analysts would do that. So we integrated that into the calculation when we initially start working with HR data sets. And then COVID-related absences. So I mentioned how sickness didn't cover these ones. So you would have noted that the COVID-19 diagnosis was the only one that came under sickness. So we had to do another dashboard to add on to this to cover absences. And this gives you a better picture. So you can start to see COVID-related absences, not sickness, peaked in April and in these months as expected. And you can start to see the reasons. So these are the number of absences. So people were self-isolating, caring of a dependent, shielding, etc. Now, these are the number of absences. When I go on to my next slide, you will see that in terms of number of days, it goes up, because people who are shielding will be off for a lot longer. And that shows here. So this is absence days. So they might have lower number of absences, but actually the number of days that they're off is much larger in the shielding, which would be expected. So these are some of the things that we've gleaned from surfacing up. Obviously, there's a lot more stat and man, which is often a very difficult thing to report on, because the numbers are riddled with data quality issues, and actually it's probably one of the ones that people in organisations are very reluctant to share. But if you have a open-minded organisation wants to fix these things, then it's easy to get hold of that as well. So yeah, these are some of the snapshots I've included in this, but I think in terms of structuring the data, I think it's really important to get that dimensional model right at the data warehouse level. If you get that right, then the dashboards are really easy to surface up, and you can start creating absence trackers, all sorts of tools that help HR as well. Many people have absence policies, and they can use the data in the system to be able to create those tools on top of the dashboards as well, which really are quite helpful and for the operational needs. So I think structuring the data, having the employee, sickness, the dimensions right, and I know that ESR has some extracts. They're all very similar for all organisations, but essentially we try and be system agnostic. It doesn't matter. A HR system should have an employee, their job roles, their sickness, these type of elements. So there's just subject areas that you need to be able to link. So we're currently working with Lisa, your neighbour, actually, Doncaster. We're building their ESR data model. We're starting to do that now. So it's something that we're quite familiar with, and are keen to share some of our learning with people on the call. But if I'll finish there if there's any questions.
Thanks, Kay. That was really interesting just to sort of see how this data sort of surfaced in a different way. And I think many of us can probably identify a little with sort of the protectionist of HR data and that kind of separate BI team. And we're quite fortunate at Rotherham. We've got quite a skilled BI team that have just embraced Power BI for themselves. But it is interesting, it is for themselves. So it's got to go, how do we now create some of the branding we were talking about? Are they part of the Insights branding, or are they separate entities entirely? And sort of that dynamic can take some figuring out from an organisational level in terms of skill sharing. Have we got any additional questions for Kay? I believe you'll be on the call for the rest of the session, hopefully. Yep. So you'll be here at the end as well for any sort of Q&A that people have got. Okay, Fab, thank you very much. So next up, we have some colleagues from the Northern Care Alliance that are going to talk us through their cancer models and their Sitrep models that they've been working on. And then after that, we'll do some of the Q&A, and I think David Chapman's also on the call, who may be helping us sort of talk through some of their experiences around pipelines, deployments, and some more of the techie aspects of Power BI beyond the visualization side. Okay, is it over to you, Daniel, or Kimberly? Who's starting us off?
I'll go first.
You going first, Kimberly? Okay,
Yeah.
go on. All right, I'll mute you again.
I'll share my screen, so just let me know when you can all see my screen.
Yeah, it's there.
So I'm Kimberly Durham, the product manager for the business information team at NCA. So I'm going to quickly just run through the product lifecycle first and how we produce our dashboards, and then I'll hand over to Daniel to actually do the showcase and sample some of our key products. So what actually is the product lifecycle and what does it entail? Our products go through this cycle of events, starting with the vision. So this could be as simple as an idea or something generated based on like the organisation's feedback or their current state. Once we've got this idea, we begin the analysis part, understanding what this vision really means, speaking with the customers to understand their needs and justifications, and then we'll start to gather all the information, start building the product specification and the requirements. Now we've got that more understanding and agreed that this is the need for the product, we'll start speaking with the development team that's involved and start planning what's actually needed technically to get the work into a development state. Once we've started that development and the product team and customers happy, we'll then launch this to the wider service and organisation. And then once it's there, it's usually in live. So this is where the suggestions and feedbacks are generated and you kind of start the cycle again. In some cases, you realise the product's actually not needed and it's short-lived, so then it's no longer needed and it's stopped. I'll quickly run through and dive into the development section of that then in a little more detail, explaining how we use the agile methodologies for our iteration approach. Our requirements are written in like a user story format, so this is usually express what the customer wants, why they need it, and giving a deeper insight into the product. Then it's prioritised, so it's prioritised in the backlog. We'll work to ensure we're creating the business value items first and then building it in an iterative way so we can continuously improve as we go along. As mentioned earlier, the development team get involved at this stage, starting to understand and starting to plan what's needed. We'll start completing the user stories and get a better understanding of how we'll plan that iteration. We usually work within a 2-week iteration, which is also known as a sprint. We'll deliver chunks of the user stories to the customer by the end of the sprint and do a retro and sprint review just to understand how's that process going, how can we improve it, and then we usually test and deliver it to the customer. To give a bit more of an example of that, and Daniel will talk about in a bit more detail, is the cancer dashboard we produced. So with this dashboard, we gathered a focus group of operational managers, service leads and analysts to review the current data spreadsheet that they were receiving and all the ad hoc requests they were asking for. We then broke that down into sizable and prioritised the chunks into development team and worked in 2-week cycles, showing the customer the results along the way and getting any feedback as we went along. The dashboard's still in iterations at the minute, and we've established a single source of a cancer performance information for the Northern Care Alliance. It's relied upon by the internal analytics team and service managers and senior strategic leads to provide information to support the manager and improve the cancer waiting times. It's also used within the cancer performance meetings and weekly MP meetings, and it's a trusted, reliable source of live data across the organisation. I'll now just hand over to Daniel to actually showcase some of them products and show what we've actually produced. So over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, my name is Daniel Crowe. I'm a BI developer based, like Kimberly, in Salford, Greater Manchester, as part of the Northern Care Alliance, and I work on the dashboards team in the informatics department. As Kim's already said, I'll presenting 2 of our dashboards. One will be the Cancer NCA that's just covered there, and also the Hospital Sitrep Live dashboard. It's going to be a really brief overview. I hope this will give you an insight into our development approach. So from my perspective as an actual developer, hopefully give you a couple of examples of some of the key challenges that we've actually overcome using the Power BI service. So this is the Cancer NCA about page. One thing that I'm going to say is that we've got a large array of divisions and departments that we actually cover as a team. So we're not focused on one area like HR, or we're not focused on another area just for performance or hospitals or individual hospitals within the NCA. So most of our approach is to try and maintain a standardized view. So a lot of our dashboard will follow very similar layouts to what I'm about to show you. And I guess you'll see that with the two that I show you as well. So quite a lot of our reports will land on either a dashboard or an about page. In this case, it's an about page. So I hope everybody can see that all right, and they don't need me to maximize the screen. Is it clear enough? You may not be able to read the words, but
I think we can't necessarily read the text on the side of our laptop, but it probably depends if we need to. I
don't think you'll need to, but what I see if I can full screen it. Might be a little bit clearer now.
There you go. I feel like I'm having
a bit better. I might have to come back out of that again, so forgive me. So yeah, on our about page, we tend to have 3 or 4 items that are consistently there. We'll always have this, and this is, I guess, this part here, which is it says here, please click here for any feedback suggestions. This is very much part of what Kimberly was saying about the life cycle. When a product is live, it's not always necessarily the finished product, when we expect feedback still to come in, and then we can obviously act upon that in part of the development cycle. So we've definitely got that there, which will take someone straight through to an email to our first line of support. And this is something that I think is quite useful. It's dashboard helpful tips, and we tend to have this as well. And what this will do is take through to another report, and it actually is just some general advice about how to use Power BI. You know, obviously we service quite a large number of customers, although we do endeavour to upskill them in terms of using the product. If they don't know how to use it, this is certainly something that I think is really useful. So this will give them some basics about drill through, exporting data, and other things like personal bookmarks, and most importantly, I think, is drill up and down. So I think that's really, really useful. And what we tend to do on this page is, this is where all of the metrics will be. So the metrics, and also if there are any target and KPIs for each of those metrics. So it's nice and clear to everybody who's using these dashboards exactly what each of the metrics means. It's also, I guess, will help to reduce the amount of work coming in, questions for end users and customers. Not sure what a metric means. They should be able to just refer to this page. So that's kind of what we go for there. So I will go back here. Oh, no, full screen. So I'll take you to the dashboard, and most of our reports follow this same flow. So you've got the main dashboard, which gives you the headline top KPIs, very high level. In this case, there are targets as well within here. So in terms of the Cancer NCA dashboard is like a retrospective performance report. It's based on live information, but it charts the patient's pathway through the cancer diagnosis and treatment pathway. So this all is just high level information that's certain areas of the business, particularly executive and maybe high level management, will be able to use. And this will be useful for presentations within individual teams, but then you will be able to hover over each of these and just to click through to individual detail pages. And most of them will follow this sort of layout, usually trend based data, which I won't necessarily drill through on any of these just to avoid any patient level. All of this is all summarized, but in some cases the user can right click and then could drill through to individual lists of data. We have part of this standardized approach is that the majority of our reports, certainly new reports, will have the date slices on every page, and that will be standardized across the top, linked across the pages. I think this is just useful. We tend to prefer on the side of using filters within the filter pane, as opposed to having too many slices on page, and I think we feel that just allows the page to be filled more with visuals and less with slices. Not always the case. Sometimes the individual customer needs the slices. For example, we've got a slicer here that they might want to use to have it more front and center. And quite often end users will like to see things in graph, but sometimes will like to see the information as a table view instead. And so we have those button options there for them on request. So that's pretty much it in terms of a basic overview. What I wanted to really cover, though, is one of the development challenges that we had when I first started. I started on the team in 2019, and Power BI, as you all know, is something that's growing all the time. And we didn't have something called data flows when I started. So when I joined the team, one of the first things that I could see was really going to be really critical, really actually quite difficult to manage, is the sheer volume and of the data sources. Plus the NCA is comprised of Salford and the Pennine Acute Trust. So that's actually a total of like 5 hospitals, but the 2 data sources have remained separate. So although there's efforts to merge all of this data, I'm sure it's going to take some time. We had 2 completely different server sources, so SQL data. In order to develop a NCA-wide or a trust-wide dashboard, you would need to merge all that data together into one data set, of course. Up until we had data flows, this was something that we would rely on our data warehouse team to do for us. So we could certainly access each of those servers and create the data ourselves in SQL. But then actually getting all that across would require some kind of ETL process, something that we wouldn't necessarily be in control of. So that could take a lot of time, and you're reliant on another area of the department. When data flows is coming, we now use it extensively for any of our products, which will pull data from both of those areas. I don't know if any of you have a similar challenge. I've found it invariably useful. It enables me to have full control. I will create the 2 separate data sets. In many cases, they will endeavor to make them exactly the same fields, so that they are almost like you could union the data together. We then use we create the views in each of those 2 completely separate environments, and we use data flows to marry the 2 together and then pull them into the dashboard on the desktop version. And that process is something that I have complete control over. So that's something that we found really useful, certainly since its inception in Power BI. Before I go on to the hospital Sitrep live dashboard, is there any questions in particular about this dashboard? Okay, so the hospital Sitrep live reports is a live view of hospital operational bed performance, and actually more recently has included COVID-19 results. I think this is going to be a good example of showing how our products don't necessarily get built all in one go. It's the agile and sprint development cycle enables us to be a lot more agile, obviously, in terms of the way that we develop something. We may start off with just a very simple concept, a simple list that one area of the business requires. Another area of the business may come in and they may be saying, right, well, we need this, and actually the products team, so Kimberly and her team will marry these together into one dashboard, as opposed to what perhaps maybe happened before, was where we have a lot of different dashboards being created off the back of individual requests. So this is the about page. It's similar layout. We've got the helpful tips here and just a brief description of all of the metrics there. This dashboard began as just this page, the summary ward. So a relatively simple matrix. I believe not all of these metrics along the top were there at the beginning. So these have been added over time. For example, the swabbing, definitely been added over time. So you've got your slices for the individual hospitals, care organizations within the trust at the top. And this was pretty standard. And of course, you've got the drill through as well to patient level. So that's how it began its life. And then over time, additional requests came in, and we were able to facilitate this. Now, this page actually has restricted information on, but this is something that I'd just like to cover here. We've got the patient details, but they are they are restricted by security. This is one of the other challenges that we've overcome within the department, and particularly our team. Security obviously being key, making sure that only the right people are seeing the right level of information. However, sometimes it is important to still see the data like this without needing to necessarily create multiple views. Row level security in Power BI is something that absolutely can be used, but it's been advertised as not useful for restricting columns. It's for restricting entire rows, which is true. So what we do is we've approached this with a measure base. So these are actually individual measures that will either display the term restricted or the text restricted if the criteria is not met, or it will actually present the actual data for the patient. We've used lots of different ways of doing that. This one in particular uses a SQL table, and on that table we have a list of users. Those users are the only people who will see that data. So that's quite a straightforward measure to set up for that kind of a result. Another example of the way we've done it is we've a more simpler approach, and something that's actually always universally going to be useful, is we've restricted another report based on the user's domain name. So the last part of their email address, so pat.nhs.uk or srft.nhs.uk, if they've got that in their email address, we are confident that they are in the right domain now. They're the right users to view whatever data that was. So that's quite a straightforward measurement. An example of one that I've built is actually using the row level security group. So we're having a security group set up where we can maintain that in the service, which is useful for future support. We don't have to update a SQL table, and that's where I've created a individual security access group, and then another group for default users. So everybody in the default users will see this page as it is now. Those who are in that security group will see the actual data. And the way that I've done that is by creating a measure that will read off that and produce a result of 1, a 0, a -1, however you might want to do it. So I think that was a good example of us implementing quite flexible security measures without necessarily just using the row level security approach, which is a little bit more restricted. Since those 2 pages were added, we've had some additional requests to come through. The My Hospital page is a good example of where there's been some feedback where you've gone, this effectively is this view. This data is the same data, but presented in a nice overview graph format. And you can actually see as well that the swabbing information, so during the COVID-19 crisis, this information was required. And this has been added in. These are all individual cycles that have happened, long after this report was created, and potentially ongoing. So the hospital today page is something that actually says down here, the dashboard is in beta. It's still undergoing testing, validation, but it's useful data, and it's rather than wait for, I don't know when this was originally created, but let's say it was a year ago. In theory, we'd now still be waiting for this to be produced. It would never go live. So the power that we've got with the approach that we use within our development cycle enables us to deliver products consistently, frequently, but also be very capable of going back to the drawing board if necessary, or adding on to it. So that's pretty much the presentation done. I don't know if anybody's got any specific questions, or if we can leave that for the Q&A session next, but I hope that's been helpful.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, it's really, really helpful. And certainly from sort of myself and my organisation, I'm not sure sort of what other people sort of want to bring in. Does anybody have any specific questions they want to ask now? If not, I'll move into a bit of a Q&A bit around setup and that type of stuff. I'll give you 5 seconds this time to raise your hand or put a comment in. So we'll do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The comments are in. Maybe I need to do 8 seconds to allow a bit more reflective thinking time after presentations. So what I was thinking of doing with this last 20 minutes, and forgive me, we've not really sort of done this before, so it'll be a case of figuring out how it works, is to almost everybody on this call will be at very different stages of their sort of Power BI journeys, and you'll have sort of come here for different reasons. So some people want to probably understand how the visualizations work and how it can look. Other people might want to understand more about workspaces and licensing costs and product setups and that side of things. Personally, I'm very interested in governance and life cycles, hence I've got a few questions for Dan in terms of how they're doing that. Do people, want to sort of raise their hands and ask a question or set the tone for what they specifically want to know about? Question. Hard to do in these types of groups. Usually, if you're all sat in front of me, I'd see nods and I'd be able to point at tables and say, you guys talk about this. Or do you want me to just carry on talking through and then you'll jump in when you think it becomes a relevant topic for these 20 minutes? I can see 6 people on my screen. I can see 1 nod and smile, and I can see a couple of blank faces. So I'm taking that as permission. I'm going to carry on talking. Fab. So thanks, Daniel. One of the things I was really interested in, I think we sort of maybe struggle with here at TRFT now, is I think we've got capability of designing models. I think we've kind of got that sorted, and we can continue to build on that skill set. What I'm not fully sighted on is our life cycle of the product development. So I just wondered whether sort of Kimberly, Daniel, you want to sort of talk us through your job titles, or the way you introduced yourself was really interesting, I thought, in terms of product manager or product developer. So how do you manage that demand when it comes in and assign priorities and stuff like?
Can I know Kimberly's going to be able to answer this question better than I, but can I just say that I've been doing this sort of thing for a long time, and I say the way it's managed at the moment is one of the best implementations that I've worked with, because there's a kind of a flexible shield between me and those that are asking for me to do work, which I think, and I've had lots of chats with Kimberly about this, and there's times when it's really useful to have that one-to-one with the customer, and I started my very first development job on this team. It was kind of like it was for HR, throw me into the shark infested waters and off you go, Daniel, this is your project. And I sat there and I found it was brilliant. I loved it, but also there's a difference between that, because it's very much micromanaged. I'm kind of having things thrown at me all the time. What Kimberly and her team are there for me is a big shield there. And actually I have the confidence if someone comes straight to me just to say, no, go to Kimberly, and then I can just carry on with my work. And I feel that the implementation, and it's ever evolving. It's not something that's set in stone. It changes a lot, but I find it really, it actually just empowers me to get on with my job. But there is still that time. There's a couple of times when it's been useful for me to actually sit in with Kimberly in meetings and speak to the actual stakeholders themselves. So I think there's a good flexibility there. But Kimberly will be able to answer your question better.
Thank you.
Yes, so to just add on to what Daniel said, we tend to just prioritise based mainly on business value, so what actually is going to bring the most business value, but speaking with the customers as well, having that communication to just go through with them, okay, well, we've got these 6 things that we can do, but we've only got 2 weeks to do it in, which is the highest priority from your perspective as well. And then when they actually see and we're actually producing something, usually on a bi-weekly basis, they get that more reassurance that, oh, okay, and it's usually at the point that you have created something that them ideas change. What they actually wanted 3 weeks ago has completely changed, and they want something different. And using that agile approach just allows you to be more flexible to say, okay, well, if we're changing the original specification, then that means that there might be an extra 2 weeks, or it might be longer before we get the finished product. But you've never really got a finished product because you've always got that feedback, and ensuring that you've got that feedback from the actual customers gives them that reassurance as well that we are going to be continuously improving, and something that they're seeing as a priority today is never usually a priority tomorrow. So just having that under control as well, and just making sure from the product's perspective you're thinking it in a more holistic view, you're making sure you've got the roadmap in mind as well, and keeping them on track with that, because sometimes it does tend to change, and having that holistic view, you can just make sure that they're aware of the other things we've got in the pipeline and that it is up and coming. Hopefully that's answered your question.
It has. In terms of what adds business value, how does your organisation help you decide what adds business value?
So in a few different ways, I'd say one of the main ones is we try to predict a lot of things. So we're trying to predict what's actually up and coming. So especially like say with the COVID, the next kind of thing with that was, okay, we're all going to be getting the vaccination. So one of the things was, okay, a vaccination programme. There were also obviously the cancer, as we showed at the point that we went into the crisis. It was okay with everything from the NHS kind of thing, especially fetus and cancers kind of went on the back burner. In a couple of months' time, that means that we're going to have to look into them things. We're going to be wanting to make sure, well, where's the waiting list up to? What is the waiting list like? How are we going to actually do something with it? So at that point in time, it was a matter of putting a bit of a roadmap together to say, okay, business value right now is obviously COVID, but in a couple of months' time, we need to be concentrating on these things and making sure that we're going to be delivering things that people are wanting in a couple of months. So just trying to predict what's actually going to be coming and how can we handle that.
Okay, it's really interesting. Thank you. I don't know, Kay, have you got your hand up to come in with a question or comment?
Yeah, comment. I think we really have to admit that actually a lot of things that we have to report on or surface up are usually things that we have to submit. It usually stems from there, and you know, all the things that have just been mentioned, the waiting, the COVID status, it usually does submissions drive that, you know, surfacing up that data. And I think it's really important for BI analytics departments to be really careful of that, because although we're driven by submissions and what needs to be surfaced up to various organisations, whether it's commissioners or you know, NHS England, etc., it's not to lose that insight and into the data, because then we forget to say, okay, what is the data telling us? What is there that's not being asked of us that we should be doing in the background anyway? So we've become very, you know, submission focused and reporting those numbers, and I think there's a fine balance, because then we don't become, it's not business intelligence anymore, it's just reporting figures. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, to keep a balanced kind of BI analytics team in there that provides insights, not just number crunching and reporting numbers that need to be surfaced up.
Thanks, Kay. Is there anybody on the call that's sort of experiencing the burden of demand that's come in with some of the Power BI development as you get up to speed with it, that can offer in how they're managing with this? Thanks, David. Yeah, come on in.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can, thanks.
Hi, probably just in relation to the point just raised as well. So one of the things that we about a year or maybe a couple of years ago, or maybe not more now, is that we created a dedicated dashboard development team, because we found that at the time that the dashboards or reporting was part of an analyst's role, which didn't give our team enough time really, or that capacity to do either. So either to do proper real analysis and analytics, or do, you know, a really good job in developing dashboards. So we made a kind of a strategic decision to split and restructure those teams, so we've got a bit more focus. So we have focus on dashboards, and then it helps us with our products function to make sure that we're the best that we can do, that we're doing the right things, and facilitating our analytics team to be focused on insights, and more of the strategic analysis and modelling as well. So that's kind of how we've sort of structured ourselves, one, to help with demand, and have focus within our teams, but also to ensure that we are doing business intelligence, we are doing analytics, we're not just presenting numbers to people.
Yeah, and it is really interesting, that, isn't it, in terms of kind of the skill sets are different, and we sort of do then almost dilute who could be an expert in what, and you kind of get a half and half rather than people excelling in the areas that they're exceptionally good at. Yeah, interesting times. Yeah.
Can I just very quickly add to that? Sorry, just from my point of view, in terms of I'm part of that team that David mentioned, and previous roles I've had have been very much what David described as being expected to both analyze and create, and produce the products. and it was doable. But I found that environment much harder to work with, to actually do either of those two jobs to the kind of level that I wanted to. In the current role I'm in, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I feel that and I've got people around me to support. We've got the analytics team to support me if I need the analytics or the metrics. So it really works from my perspective.
So the other sort of question that sort of comes our way quite frequently when I've been talking sort of in our regional business intelligence forums, when we sort of talked about maybe getting this event sort of moving, is there's a lot of organisations that are just starting off with Power BI. And I wonder whether there's any questions in the group or any advice for those of us that are a little bit further along the line in terms of how to get started. I certainly know from Cloud 2 that's sort of one of your sort of business niches, wasn't it, for a while, possibly still is. Do you want to sort of just talk through how you suggest organisations get started? And I also noticed Simon's come in with a comment on that as well.
Are you going to pick that one up, Tara?
Yeah, I can kick that off. I think firstly, there's lots of really good, useful content from Microsoft freely available, and I'm sure we're all tapping into it, and we really should. It's certainly far better than it used to be back in the day, I think. And they've even got presenters on YouTube that are really quite engaging and almost cool, which is again
to us at least.
There's definitely well. I think there's definitely been a new Microsoft for the last few years, and obviously the technology is changing these days monthly, and it has been since the transitions to the cloud over the last few years. So it's an area that I think the NHS need to continue to try and invest in terms of trying to find some capacity to keep up with what's happening. From our perspective, we've obviously put together some packages for customers to try and help provide that kickstart type approach, but I think there's lots of ways you can go about doing it. The obvious thing is to pick a data set and really get your hands dirty with one of your team that's a bit of an internal champion, and see how far you get, and try and work out where your gaps are. We also have some assessments that we run typically for free that might be of use to some NHS organisations. Julie, I don't know if you want to come in there, but kind of things to help organisations self-assess and see where they're up to. Across, originally it was just a Power BI readiness, but these days it's more, there's additional ones for team skills and Azure data, etc.
So what I might ask, rather than sort of Julie coming in at that point, if we sort of, obviously we'll drop your details in, and then people can sort of query about more around that just in the sort of last 5-10 minutes or so. So I think in order of hands on my screen, I've got Simon, Kay, and then David. I'm not sure if that's the same hand or to come in on this topic in general. So if there's Simon first.
Yeah, at Lewisham, we're still a ClickView using organisation. Just wondering if anybody's had any experience of translating from ClickView to Power BI. What are the gaps between the two? What can Power BI do that ClickView doesn't, and vice versa? Is Sharmini still on the call?
No, I think she's off the call now. But I think we can capture the question and certainly link you in. I'll just look to see whether any hands are raised specifically, any new hands specifically on that question. Yep, so Gillian's raised a hand, so come in at that point.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jill Kane, and I'm one of the principal developers at the NCA as well. And yes, we have migrated pretty much the majority now of our reports from ClickView into Power BI. And I think when we started our migration programme, there was some functionality that we couldn't replicate in ClickView, in Power BI, sorry. But since this was probably, we're looking at probably 2 years ago now, but since Power BI has its regular updates, most of that functionality is now available. So there's very little that we can't do in Power BI now. And I think from our point of view, it's been the main blocker really is the users and just getting them to accept the change of platform really. But I think that with now our agile approach and with the products function that we've got, having that link in with the customers, that has really made it much easier for us.
Can I just ask, have you found any great cost savings in switching from ClickView to Power BI?
David, can you answer that one?
Shall we join you up at the end of the session for that conversation?
Yeah, I was going to, in short, yes, we did.
Thank you. So we are sort of coming to 12 o'clock, when I'm happy to continue to take the questions if people are still sort of available on there. It's just Kay and David, I think, had their hands up as just final comments for the session.
Yeah, I was going to just go back to the Microsoft licensing model. I personally think it's not easy to understand and navigate through. You know, you go and look at Power BI license model, and I think sometimes, you know, we've experienced working with trusts where, you know, they've got a whole bunch of Power BI Pro licenses, and then they've also got SQL Server Enterprise with software assurance where Power BI report comes free with that. And I think there's some confusion over what you know, what is available and how easy it is to migrate over to Power BI report server, especially because essentially it's the upgraded version of SSRS, which, you know, many organizations already use. And I think having worked with organizations that are very heavily embedded with Click, you know, and we know that the Click licensing model is quite costly compared to, say, if you go down to the Power BI report server model. So there's a massive saving in there, but I think it's just trying to understand the licensing model and ensuring, and it's not always clear from Microsoft. And I think advice from people, because people in organizations don't actually know if they're have software assurance. Many times they find out, and that's the kind of questions we put to them, how easily they can obtain you know, an on-premises Power BI report server and have that assurance that their data is all on site and it's not on the cloud, because there is apprehension from healthcare organizations for putting reports into, you know, Abyss or the cloud. Yeah.
So what I am going to do, just to sort of bring it into a close, I can see there's still some questions going sort of through the conversation, but I think if we can drop some of your emails into the chat, people can connect and sort of follow on through. We will make sure that everybody has other people's contact details if they are willing to share them. What I would like to do is just thank everybody for their time today, because I know it isn't easy to make this time, but I think if we don't make this time, then we'll spend time redesigning things that we're already doing elsewhere. So what I will also like is comments just around feedback. We'll send out an evaluation form after this, and whether or not to basically regroup as a bit of an AphA specialist group, and if so, what type of things you would like us to discuss in the future around Power BI. So thank you. I feel like I should give you a round of applause for all the speakers, and really, really lovely to see you all.